Hello everyone. Back again on Chanel Story Friends. This time we will tell you about the film The Mummy, which was released in 2017. Don't forget to prepare snacks and sit in the most comfortable place. Let's sky. The story can begin when a group of subway tunnel diggers accidentally found ancient tombs, which are connected to each other under the city of London, which was so wide, the burial complex, so that part of it was also submerged under the Thames River. The incident became news headlines nationally, and everyone is starting to realize, if the city of London actually stands on a grave, the tomb is strongly suspected of being the burial place of the Knights Templar, who had previously invaded Egypt before they returned to England. When the officers were checking the tomb, suddenly a group of people claiming to be government agents came, ordering them to get out of the way, and strangely the train line that previously crossed the area was moved because of the discovery of the tomb. We were shown an explanatory story of the past, which featured the future heir to the Egyptian kingdom named Princess Ahmanet, is training in front of her father. She is the only child of the pharaoh, and will later become a successor to the father's monarchist. Ahmanet is considered a god by his people, but suddenly things change, when Pharaoh's wife gives birth a son, which means the birth of a son will lower Ahmanet's position, as the sole heir to the Egyptian kingdom. Ahmanet, who has been controlled by ambition, performs a ritual pact with the god of death, known as Sed. While the ritual is in progress, a black figure appears giving Ahmanet a knife, with a red agate in the hilt. The moment he held the knife, Ahmanet's body transformed, causing death inscriptions to appear on the surface of his skin. Now he was reborn as an ally of the god of death. With that knife, Ahmanet killed Pharaoh, his wife, and a newborn baby. Then he continued his task of resurrecting the god of death, through the medium of growing a man who was chosen, but just before the ritual was finished, Ahmanet was shot with anesthetic, by the royal priests, because of Ahmanet's evil actions in Mummy Alive. Her body, taken far from Egypt, was erased from history. Back to the present, we will focus on two American soldiers, who work side by side as antique sellers and thieves. They are spying on a village in eastern Mesopotamia. The two people are Nick and his partner Doms, armed with a treasure map, which he stole earlier. Nick invited Doms to enter the village, where the area was actually controlled by the rebels. Realizing that the incident was Doms refused, because he considered it too dangerous, and added that if their superiors found out, it could be more dangerous again. But Nick made sure that the treasure stored in the area must be very valuable, and could make them rich suddenly, but very far from what they imagined. Things went out of plan. After they managed to sneak into the village, they were chased by many armed rebels. Now the choice is surrender or die. Doms, who panicked, immediately contacted the American Army headquarters, asking for help. A few moments later, came the air support that bombarded the area. The rebels immediately fled. The explosion left a large hole in the road. Shortly thereafter, an avalanche occurred that made Nick and Doms fall. The explosion triggered an avalanche that led to an ancient cave, which had been hidden deep underground. Because of that discovery, their boss and a dozen army personnel came there. His boss scolded Nick and Doms for acting rashly. It turned out that his boss knew that Nick and Dom's side profession, who likes to steal artifacts and treasures for them to sell on the black market. And in the middle of that incident, suddenly a woman named Jenny came. Without further ado, she immediately slapped Nick. She was angry because Nick stole a map from her. And it turned out that the map was what guided her to find this place. Jenny was the son of an archaeologist, who is involved in discovering ancient buildings in the Middle East. Jenny was surprised to see a cave that was open due to an explosion, He immediately understood that the cave was an ancient Egyptian tomb, but the question was why the tombs of the ancient Egyptians could exist in the Mesopotamia region, which incidentally is thousands of kilometers from Egypt. The boss wants Nick and Doms to be responsible for this incident. He wants them to escort him into the cave, to check its contents.
Arriving in the cave, Jenny found drops of mercury flowing to a place. At this point, Jenny felt something was wrong, because mercury in ancient Egyptian civilization was believed to be able to weaken demonic powers. After they turned on the lights and went deeper into cave passage, sure enough there is a pool filled with liquid mercury. While Jenny was busy checking, Nick and Doms took advantage of the opportunity to look for the treasures that were there. Nick then saw a weight, which was connected via a rope with something in the pool. He suspected that the rope was related to a treasure. Out of curiosity, Nick broke the rope, and the result was that the weight fell, and pulled out a sarcophagus, with the monstrous shape of the pawn. At the same time, suddenly hundreds of spiders appeared around them. The spider bit Doms. Reflexively he shot a bunch of spiders. When Doms calmed down, Nick, who was looking at the sarcophagus, suddenly got strange hallucination. He sees a beautiful woman in the middle of the desert, is walking towards him. The woman is Ahmanet. He says that Nick is the chosen one. A moment later Jenny revived Nick. They also asked for help from the helicopter, to remove the sarcophagus. They took the sarcophagus to a cargo plane to be taken to a research center in London. In the distance, Nick saw a sandstorm approaching. The troops put the sarcophagus into the plane. They immediately took off to avoid the sandstorm.
In the Dom's plane, which had been stung by a spider, suddenly died slowly, and no one was aware of it. It was seen that Nick justified his actions in stealing maps from Jenny, because thanks to his actions they managed to find a relic history. But Jenny didn't just forgive him. At the other end suddenly Doms got up, and tried to cut the rope on the sarcophagus. It didn't stop there, that Doms also stabbed the commander, who tried to stop his actions. This incident made everyone panic. When Doms trying to stab Nick was forced to shoot him. Doms fell, and it looks like this time he really died.
I'm sorry.
The strangeness continued, with the arrival of thousands of crows, which crashed into the plane. The incident damaged the plane's engine and began to fall. On the plane, Nick put Jenny on a parachute, but Nick himself didn't have a parachute anymore, and in the end he fell with the plane, which almost crashed into a monastery. The next day at the London hospital, officers asked Jenny to identify the bodies of the victims, because he was the only passenger who survived the plane crash. In the morgue, a body resurrected. He was Nick. Somehow miraculously, he came back from the dead. Suddenly a Dom's figure appeared to shock Nick. A few moments later Jenny and two officers came in to check. They were amazed to see Nick's figure, who was still alive. Dom suddenly disappeared too. On the other hand, not far from the monastery where the plane crashed, two members of the search team were seen examining the debris left by the plane's wing. Then one saw the sarcophagus. Out of curiosity, he opened it. Suddenly the mummy inside got up and kissed it. One member of the search team remaining then checked his friend. It turned out that his friend's body had shrunk beyond recognition. In the midst of his confusion, suddenly a mummy figure appeared who kissed him. His body was dry and shrank, sucked by mummy Ahmanet. By sucking on other people's bodies, Ahmanet's body slowly looks back intact. Ahmanet then revives the two victims, who he just killed. They move as if they understand what Ahmanet wants. In the middle of the city, in a small bar, Jenny wonders how Nick can survive the plane crash. Nick, who doesn't know nothing, too confused to find the answer. There, Jenny said that if she works with a group of archaeologists, who have long been looking for the tomb of an ancient Egyptian princess, whose history has been erased from history. At the same time, they are also after a knife with a blood gem in the hilt. The knife is believed to be able to bring said the god of death into the mortal world, and according to history circulating, the blood gem that is on the knife has been removed and hidden by the Knights Templar, who once invaded Egypt, and coincidentally, not long ago an ancient tomb complex has been found under the city of London. Jenny believes that the sarcophagus they carried on the plane contains the body of Ahmanet, which had been hidden far outside the territory of Egypt. In the middle of the conversation, Nick kept seeing the Dom's figure who was trying to talk to him. Nick then said goodbye to go to the toilet. Nick initially thought that he was hallucinating, because only he was aware of the existence of the Dom's figure. But Udin convinced Nick that he was real. He said, if in that cave, he had been cursed, and also Nick was also cursed, there was only one way to end their curse, namely by following all of Ahmanet's wishes, and the only reason Nick survived the plane crash was because he had a role in the big incident, which had been planned by Ahmanet. Nick, who was unable to digest everything that was said by Doms, then panicked, and came out of the bar. There, he saw a creature, an army, thousands of rats, trying to gnaw it.
A moment later it turned out that he was in the middle of the road. Luckily he was immediately made aware of by Jenny, and it turned out that it was just his shadow. Nick panicked. Then he told what Doms had said earlier, but Jenny was confused and could not believe what Nick had said. Then Nick returned, got a visual flash, and felt something was pulling him to a place. He also took Jenny to the crash site, to find the sarcophagus, but when he got there, what made Jenny confused was Nick instead took him into the monastery instead of where the rubble was scattered wreckage of the plane. He saw a visual flash again. When he realized, he was already in the monastery. Suddenly something attacked him. He was held by 4 Ahmanet soldiers. Then Ahmanet's bummy, who was already half human, jumped on him. Ahmanet said that if he will use this body as a medium to awaken said the god of death. Ahmanet took a knife from inside the statue. When he was about to stab Nick, he suddenly stopped when he saw a blood-red gem. The knife handle was gone, and at the same time Jenny entered and was confused by the incident. Nick also ordered Jenny to run from there, and angry Ahmanet immediately chased him. When Nick had managed to escape from Ahmanet's troops, he stabbed Ahmanet, who almost sucked Jenny's soul. They ran outside, and used a car to escape from there. But in fact, they just drove around the forest, and ended up back at the monastery. Not giving up, Nick again stepped on the gas to get away from there. But this time Ahmanet's troops attacked them, and made the car they were using had an accident. Luckily they survived, but without them knowing it, it turned out that Ahmanet was already there. Nick also dared to attack Ahmanet.
But it was only in vain. Ahmanet hit Nick until he was thrown like a ball. A few moments later, many troops appeared who attacked Ahmanet and drugged him with mercury. When Nick asked who they were, one of them even drugged Nick until he was unconscious. When Nick realized they were leading him into a room, there were stored various unnatural things, such as a vampire skull preserved in a glass tube. Those people then leaving Nick. Shortly thereafter, a man appeared in front of Nick. That person was named Dr. Henry Jekyll. He was a criminal pathologist, neurosurgeon, lawyer, and also a scientist. In essence, he was a strange genius. Their ugly told stories. If he had an unnatural disease, when he told stories his body was shaking. The veins in his face also looked black. Jekyll then injected medicine in his hand. In a few seconds, the strange symptoms began to disappear. Jekyll told me that all this time, He had been trying to find a medicine that could permanently curing his illness. Jekyll then invites Nick to another room, where Ahmanet is seen chained, and mercury is injected into his body. It is able to soak Ahmanet's strength. There is also Jenny. It turns out that all this time Jenny is the doctor's subordinate. The ugly doctor welcomes the protesium of an institution that anticipates and studies things beyond reason, which causes disasters, such as Ahmanet. He says that Ahmanet is the oldest discovery he has ever seen. Mummy Ahmanet, who has been hidden for 5,000 years and erased from history. He said that Nick had been cursed, and his body was the one chosen as the medium to awaken, said the god of death. Jekyll then said that he could cure Nick. Ahmanet then said that no one could change destiny. The curse was unbreakable, right? Ahmanet says if he will make Nick immortal. When it happens, then Nick will become a god. World will follow his wish. Nick will be able to revive the dead. They both will form a new world. Ahmanet then screams in pain, because the ugly doctor multiplied the dose of mercury into his body. Then Nick and Jenny were seen sitting together, looking at Ahmanet's body. Jenny apologized because from the start he was not honest with Nick. He never imagined if Nick would be like this. He said Nick was a good person, who was willing to sacrifice his life by giving the only parachute on the plane for Jenny.
Nick also answered, if at that time he thought that there were 2 parachutes. Then came the ugly doctor and invited Nick to speak in his office. There Nick asked the ugly doctor to immediately remove the curse, but unexpectedly the ugly doctor refused, and said that Nick should accept his destiny, for the good of the people. He asked Nick to make a sacrifice, so that later received the curse. His body can be researched and dissected by scientists. Nick was angry at the words of the dirty doctor. In another place the doctor's men were seen, able to feel the presence of the blood gem. He summoned a small spider, and sent it into the ear one of the officers. In the office you could see Dr. Jekyll's body shaking. He tried to take the medicine that was near him, but Nick grabbed it. It was seen that Dr. Jekyll was starting to lose control. He ordered everyone who was there to run, but it was too late. Nick was locked in the room with the ugly doctor. Jenny, who was outside, trying to find another way to save Nick. It seems that now the ugly doctor has changed. He has been completely controlled by a demon named Hyde. He has extraordinary powers such as a double personality. Hyde is different from the Dr. Jekyll. Yes, instead invites this to work together. He tells Nick to accept his curse. That way together they will become kings of the world. While they are busy fighting, elsewhere Ahmanet manages to influence the officers to release the chain.
When Nick was cornered, he managed to grab the drug and stab it into Hyde's chest. It made Hyde hurt, and he turned back into the figure of a dirty doctor. Jenny then came over to Nick. He invited Nick to look for blood gems and destroy them, because without gems that ritual can't be done. When Nick runs away, Ahmanet, who sees him, immediately gets angry and escapes. Ahmanet then summons a sandstorm in order to slow down Nick, who runs away from him. Outside it can be seen that everyone is panicking because of the sandstorm that appears unnaturally. In the office, Dr. Jekyll's subordinates warn their colleagues to close all access to the underground tomb, because sooner or later Ahmanet, who manages to escape, will definitely come to get the blood-red gem. Nick and Jenny trying to escape from a very fierce sandstorm. In the midst of his efforts to protect Jenny, Nick saw Doms, who told him where the blood-red jewel was hidden. Nick followed him. Doms directed Nick to a tunnel that led to an underground tomb, but without them knowing, Ahmanet had arrived there first. He awakened all the knight's skeleton that was buried to be his army. Elsewhere Nick saw the arrival of Ahmanet's troops, ran towards him. He immediately ran to save Jenny. In the tomb you could see the body of a knight who rose, attacked the officers who were locked there. After the officers had succeeded paralyzed, they opened the door of the tomb to welcome Ahmanet, where Ahmanet managed to find a blood-red gem, and put it on a knife handle. Elsewhere, Nick and Jenny were attacked by Ahmanet's troops, until they fell into a sewer filled with water. There suddenly Ahmanet appeared and dragged Jenny into the water. Nick tried to chase, but he couldn't find Jenny. He returned to the surface to breathe air, and dived back to look for Jenny. There he saw Jenny already silent, running out of oxygen. While avoiding the pursuit of Ahmanet's troops, Nick pulled Jenny's body and brought her to the surface. There Ahmanet's troops instead caught her. She was dragged before Ahmanet. That's where she saw Jenny's face was pale and lifeless. All Ahmanet's troops knelt, then disappeared into dust. A sad Nick then attacked Ahmanet, but it was only in vain. Ahmanet told him to surrender to accept fate. But Nick looked back at Jenny's body. There Ahmanet started to lose his temper and threw him. Then Ahmanet broke Nick's leg. Ahmanet kept telling Nick to give up, but Nick made him even more irritated, and without realizing it, Nick had stolen his dagger. Thief. Then Nick slammed the knife until the blood gem cracked. Seeing Nick's action, Ahmanet immediately said if Nick broke the gem, then he would die. He would lose the opportunity to control the living and the dead. At that time Nick looked at Jenny's body. For a moment Nick paused. Then he stabbed the knife into his own body. Instantly Nick vibrated. His corneas split into two. He had turned into the god of death said. Nick walked towards Ahmanet and dropped his dagger. When Nick saw Jenny's body, he regained consciousness, and remembering the words of the ugly doctor, if he has to sacrifice for the greater good. But Ahmanet distracts Nick. Nick is again reminded of Jenny's words. If Nick is a good person, and willing to sacrifice for others, Nick attacks Ahmanet.